I turned 80 the day my children quietly began circling what I would leave behind. Not with malice, not with violence, but with the kind of practiced charm and careful words that come when people want something without looking like they do. It was a beautiful day, by any standard. The garden was trimmed, the tables dressed in soft linen, sunlight cutting through the trees just enough to make everything feel staged. I sat beneath the oak Evelyn and I planted the year we paid off the mortgage. That tree had grown tall and wide, but not nearly as wide as the distance between me and the family gathered in front of me. They called it a celebration, an 8th birthday, but I could tell from the moment the first glass was raised that it wasn't about me. Not really. It was about what I represented, about what they believed they were owed, and about what they assumed I hadn't yet finalized. Rebecca arrived first, dressed in soft green, with a bottle of wine tucked into the crook of her arm. She smiled warmly, kissed my cheek, and told me I looked strong for my age. Then, before I could reply, she'd already moved on, scanning the backyard like she was mentally measuring where the new fence could go. She asked how I was feeling. I told her I was fine. She nodded like she didn't quite believe me. And then she asked who managed my documents now that Evelyn was gone. Not even 5 minutes in, Henry came next. My oldest, confident, polished, always rehearsed. He brought a bottle of scotch I'd stopped drinking years ago. His handshake was firm, his smile forced. His wife hovered nearby, throwing glances at the house, at the back porch, at the way the garden opened toward the far end of the property. Henry didn't ask about my health either. He jumped straight into talking about logistics and efficiency, words he only ever used when he wanted control. Daniel was last, my youngest, quieter than the others. No fanfare, no bottle, no performative hug. He handed me a small envelope with a photo inside, a picture of me and Evelyn on our wedding day. No card, no caption, just the memory. He said little, but he looked me in the eyes and sat near me for a while, and that meant more than any toast would later. The party unfolded around me. Grandchildren ran between tables. The caterers moved with smooth, quiet precision. A jazz trio played under a pop-up tent. From the outside, it must have looked like a perfect gathering. But when you've lived long enough, you learn to see the strain beneath the smiles. They weren't here to honor me. They were here to watch each other, to listen for clues, and to calculate their place in line. Rebecca made a toast. She called it a celebration of resilience. She said I'd taught them the meaning of perseverance, that my story was one of grit and wisdom. Everyone clapped. But when she sat down, I noticed how quickly she leaned toward Henry. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. Something about not updated since Mom passed, and we need to do this before it's too late. I didn't say a thing. I just sipped my tea and let the wind carry their voices past me. You learn something strange as you get older. How easily people forget that you're still watching. That your silence doesn't mean you're lost. It just means you've learned when not to interrupt the performance. After the toast, Henry pulled me aside. Said he'd been speaking with a financial advisor. Told me that with the market the way it was, I might want to think seriously about consolidating assets. He framed it like a favor, like he was trying to protect me. But the word he used stuck with me. He said I should prepare the transfer, not plan for it, prepare it, as if I wasn't even part of it anymore. I nodded, smiled, told him I'd think about it. Rebecca circled back not long after, asking if I had ever looked into moving into a smaller place. She said she'd found a few brochures, high-end, of course. She insisted it wasn't about pushing me out. She said it was just a conversation. But her fingers tapped on the folder in her lap like she was already sealing the deal. Daniel stayed quiet through it all. He helped refill drinks, talked to the grandchildren. At one point, I watched him kneel to fix a loose stone in the garden path. No one noticed, but I did. Because he wasn't trying to impress me. He was simply doing what needed to be done. By late afternoon, I was back in the living room, alone for a few minutes. I sat in Evelyn's old armchair, the one with the faded arms and the knitted blanket she made the year before she died. From that seat, I could see the entire garden through the window. I saw my children, the people we raised, talking like business partners, negotiating, strategizing. I thought of the original will, still in my desk upstairs, the one from 13 years ago, the one that split everything 3 ways. Back then, it had made sense. They were all still showing up, still helping, still calling for birthdays. But time had changed more than just their addresses. It had changed the very core of what they believed they were entitled to. And I realized then, sitting in that chair, that I owed none of them anything more than the truth. I had already rewritten the will 2 weeks before, not out of anger, but because I finally saw them clearly. I'd spoken with an attorney they didn't know about. Quietly, deliberately. I had made decisions based not on who shouted loudest or who visited most, but on character, on presence, on memory. Daniel would inherit the house, not because he asked for it, but because he didn't. Because he understood that some things aren't owed, they're entrusted. Henry and Rebecca would receive something too, but not what they expected. And the documents? The real ones? They were already filed. But I had made one final gesture. 3 sealed envelopes, one for each child. A letter, a truth, a gift they couldn't return. That night, I knew what was coming. I could feel it building. But they had no idea. They thought I was too old to notice, too tired to act, too grateful to speak. But I had one more move to make, and I planned to make it before the cake was even served. It's strange how grief doesn't just change who's at the dinner table. It changes what's being said when you're no longer looking. After Evelyn passed, I expected the house to feel quieter. What I didn't expect was how quickly that silence filled with questions. Not about her, but about what would happen to everything she left behind. The shift was slow, subtle at first. Henry started visiting more often. Those visits came with folders and financial advice. He asked how I was managing. He brought up downsizing, gently at first. Then came the spreadsheet he left on the counter. Typed, color-coded, estimating what the house might fetch in a hot market. I remember standing in the kitchen staring at the column marked net proceeds. I wasn't even listed. Rebecca, in her own way, followed a similar path. She stopped coming as often, but when she did, she came bearing options. Assisted living brochures, articles on elder care, lists of private facilities with dignity. She told me I deserved peace, but her eyes always lingered on the study window, the one that looked out over the eastern lawn. She once said, "You could have a whole new life, Dad," and smiled like I was supposed to be grateful for being packaged and relocated. Daniel stayed away for a long time, not out of malice. He's never been the one to fight for space. He'd write occasionally, short notes, never asking for anything. When he finally did visit, he didn't say much at all. Just brought groceries, helped fix the faucet, and left a photo on the hallway mirror. It was of Evelyn and me, standing in front of a house the day we moved in. No frame, no note, just taped quietly to the glass like a reminder. It was around that time that I fell. Nothing dramatic, no ambulance, just a misplaced shoe on the back steps and a badly bruised hip. But news travels quickly in families like mine, not out of concern, but out of alertness. The next morning, Henry called. His tone was rehearsed, almost tender. He said it might be time to get things in order. That phrase again, always said with warmth, always meant with urgency. Rebecca followed with a visit that felt more like a strategy meeting. She sat across from me in the den, crossed her legs, and began talking about timelines. "We should make sure everything is properly documented, Dad, before anything unexpected happens. It'll save everyone trouble." I listened. I nodded. And inside, I quietly decided I was done nodding. That night, I retrieved the will. The old one. The one I signed when Evelyn was still alive. When I still believed that treating them all equally meant treating them all fairly. I stared at the signatures, at the outdated address lines, at the assumption that fairness meant Samness. It didn't anymore. I remembered something Evelyn once said, near the end. We were sitting on the porch, her voice low and tired. She said, "Fair isn't always equal. Not when love hasn't been equal." I hadn't known what she meant back then. I do now. The next morning, I called a new attorney. One Henry didn't know. A quiet man with kind eyes in a small office far from the city. I brought everything to him. My records, my history, and my decision. He listened, took notes, and didn't once suggest I reconsider. Together, we drafted a new plan. I removed the equal thirds. I removed the assumptions. What I left was intention. Henry would receive a letter. In it, I wrote what I had never said aloud, that while I appreciated his diligence, I couldn't reward control disguised as care, that a legacy isn't a transaction, it's a trust, Rebecca's letter was gentler, but no less honest. I told her she had brought me every option in the world but never once asked what I wanted, that concern doesn't mean pressure, and that presence can't be replaced by pamphlets. And Daniel, he would receive the house, the land, the memories, not because he asked, but because he never did, because he saw me as I was, not as a burden or a stepping stone, but simply as his father. The rest of the estate would be handled accordingly. Modest gifts for the grandchildren, donations to causes Evelyn cared about, and final instructions tucked into a sealed envelope, labeled only with the word truth. It was Evelyn's handwriting. She'd written it years ago and left it in a drawer I didn't open until after she passed. Inside, just one line. Give them who they were. Let them decide if they can live with it. The new documents were signed, notarized, filed securely. But I kept 3 copies with me. Not for negotiation, for delivery. They were placed in a small black safe, the kind no one would think to open, hidden beneath the cushion of Evelyn's chair in the living room. Not out of secrecy, out of timing. I would give them on my birthday. Not as revenge, as clarity. Because what they wanted was confirmation of their position. What they would receive was a reflection of their character. The morning of my 80th birthday, I opened the safe again, checked the envelopes. My hands didn't shake, my breath didn't falter. I closed it, turned the key, and slid it back into my coat pocket. I looked around the house. The photographs, the worn rug, the kitchen tile we never replaced. This was a home, built brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. And I knew that once the truth was handed out, none of them could ever return it. I wasn't just giving them a will. I was giving them back to themselves. Time came. I would be ready. The breakdown began just after the toast, when the sun dipped low and the wine started working its way into words better left unsaid. It didn't take much, just a single question disguised as concern, a single suggestion wrapped in family language. Rebecca was the first to say it out loud. She stood near the fountain, glass in hand, voice lowered just enough to seem casual. She wondered aloud whether it made sense for one person to keep the house if it couldn't be evenly divided. She said it was only fair that, if the property was staying in the family, the rest of them should receive their share in some other form. Her tone was even, but I've known her since she was born. I heard the edge underneath. Henry, always ready to back her when it served him, chimed in with talk of balance and practicality. He used words like market value and equity. He wasn't asking questions. He was stating terms. Daniel stood nearby, silent, still. He didn't interject, but he didn't nod either. He watched them both like someone watching a scene he'd seen rehearsed too many times. I sat quietly, listening. They didn't speak to me. They spoke around me, about what I might do, about what would be fair, about how complicated things might get if left unclear. They used the word we a lot, but I wasn't included in that we. I was the subject, not the participant. That's when I stood, slowly, calmly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I told them we could talk now, since they clearly come prepared. I looked at Rebecca, then at Henry. Neither of them spoke. I reached into my coat pocket and held up the small key, old, dull brass, worn smooth by time. It had been on my ring for decades. Only one lock matched it. I turned to Daniel and asked him to bring me the black safe from beneath his mother's old chair. He nodded once and disappeared into the house without a word. I could feel the others watching, confused. Henry leaned toward me, asking what this was about. I didn't answer. I just waited. A few minutes later, Daniel returned, safe in hand. It wasn't large, but in that moment, it felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. I placed it on the table beside me, inserted the key, and opened it slowly. 3 envelopes, one for each of them. Thick, sealed, each one marked by hand with their name. I handed the first to Rebecca, then Henry, then Daniel. No one reached for theirs right away. I looked at them, steady. I told them these were my final words on the matter. Not legal documents, not bargaining chips, just truths, observations, decisions made with a clear head and a clear heart. Rebecca opened hers first. She read it silently, lips pressed tight. Her shoulders squared, then fell. She folded the letter, but not neatly. She looked at me, then down at the grass. Henry tore his open more aggressively. I could see his eyes moving faster than his mind could process. His jaw tensed. He muttered something, probably meant for me, but said too low for anyone else to hear. He placed the letter face down on the table like it had burned his hand. Daniel didn't open his. Not then. He held it in both hands, looking not at me but at the safe, still open beside us. He was the first to speak. He wanted to know if this was some kind of punishment, if I was trying to teach a lesson. He called it dramatic. He said I was letting emotions cloud good judgment. I told him I had never been clearer in my life. Rebecca tried to keep her voice even, but I could hear it shaking. She said she didn't understand. She said she'd always tried to do what was right for me. I let her finish before I told her the truth, that what she thought was right for me was always what was most convenient for her. That care isn't the same as control. I turned to Daniel and told him he didn't need to open the letter unless he wanted to. He nodded again, still quiet, still steady. Then I placed the final document on the table, the summary page of the updated trust. Not the whole thing, just the piece that mattered. It was signed, notarized, and stamped. I let it sit there in silence. I told them the paperwork was already filed, the decisions made. There would be no changes, no negotiations, no appeals. I had given them what they had asked for, even if they hadn't realized it. I had shown them who they were in the end. They didn't scream. They didn't protest. Not loudly, anyway. Rebecca folded her letter and slipped it into her purse without another word. Her husband came to her side, hand on her back, ushering her toward the car, like he'd been waiting for this. Henry stood a moment longer, shaking his head. He said something under his breath. Then he left, walking fast, not looking back. Daniel remained. He helped me close the safe. He picked up the empty wine glasses. He didn't open his envelope until hours later, long after the house had gone quiet again. I watched them all go, one by one. No yelling, no storming, just the heavy silence of people confronted with something final. Everyone left quietly. And in the stillness that followed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. After they left, I sat alone in the living room, the last of the light fading behind Evelyn's curtains. The house didn't feel empty. It felt honest. That kind of silence only comes after truth is spoken out loud, and no one dares respond. I didn't move right away. I let it settle. The glasses on the table still held melted ice. A half-eaten piece of cake sat forgotten on a plate. The garden beyond the window was calm again, like nothing had happened. But everything had. Daniel stayed. He didn't ask questions. He didn't try to fill the silence with comfort. He simply gathered dishes, folded napkins, and sat with me while the evening unwound itself. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. He said he was sorry it had to happen this way. I told him I wasn't. I meant it. I wasn't sorry at all. For too long, I had allowed the illusion of peace to cover what had been slowly rotting. The birthday party wasn't a breakdown. That came years earlier, in the form of assumptions, of control masked as care, of attention measured in expected return. What happened tonight wasn't cruel. It was overdue. People think revenge has to be loud, that it needs shouting, slammed doors, public spectacle. But the truest kind of reckoning is quiet. It slips in when the pretending stops. It walks in calmly, places the truth on the table, and waits. And that's what I did. I stopped pretending. And in doing so, I gave each of my children something they had never truly wanted, but desperately needed: their reflection. Rebecca believed she could orchestrate the future, plan her way into legacy. She brought structure, strategy, solutions. But not once did she ask what I felt. Not once did she speak from a place of stillness. What I gave her wasn't punishment. It was clarity. The letter I wrote wasn't cruel. It simply named the distance she'd created, the quiet accounting behind every visit. She came to divide, not to share. Now she would carry the weight of knowing she had been seen. Henry thought he was the executor before he was even named. He used the language of duty to disguise his ambition, called me capable while quietly steering me towards signatures, advisors, and timelines. He wanted to control the outcome before the ending had even been written. His letter told him that. But he was never disqualified by his competence, but by his coldness. That trust requires something more than management. It requires care. Daniel's envelope remained unopened for a full day. He didn't rush to read it. He didn't ask why I made the choices I did. He just stayed. He swept the floor. He wiped down the kitchen counters. And when he finally opened the letter, he did so alone, in the garden where Evelyn used to sit with her morning coffee. Inside, he found no explanation, only a thank you, and a deed. The house was his. The garden, the land, Not because he earned it, but because he never treated it like a transaction. That night, I slept better than I had in years. I didn't dream of confrontation or closure. I dreamt of Evelyn, young again, laughing, hanging laundry on the line, her hands full of clothespins and sunlight. I woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of Daniel feeding the birds. The following weeks passed gently. Rebecca didn't call. Henry sent a brief email, civil but formal, letting me know he'd consulted someone about next steps. There were no next steps. Not for them. Everything had already been settled. Daniel continued to visit, not every day, but often enough. He brought groceries. He mowed the lawn. Sometimes, he sat beside me on the porch and said nothing, and that was enough. One afternoon, I asked him to help me plant a magnolia tree where the old swing used to be. He dug the hole, steady and patient, while I stood nearby holding the young tree. When it was placed and the soil patted down, I handed him a sealed envelope. I told him it wasn't legal. It was personal. Instructions, of a kind, for when I'm gone. He nodded, didn't open it, and tucked it into his coat. I think he understood that not all inheritances are about land or letters. Some are about weight, and some are about letting go. What I gave my children that day wasn't a gift of wealth. It was a mirror. I held it up without judgment, and I let them decide what they saw in it. Some turned away. One stayed, and in the quiet that followed, I made peace with all of it. A month later, Rebecca wrote to me. A real letter, not an email. She didn't apologize, but she said she'd read my words more than once. She said she wasn't ready to talk, but she was thinking differently now. I didn't write back. Not because I was angry, but because some things are better digested slowly. She'd reach out again when she was ready, or she wouldn't. That part no longer belonged to me. Henry never replied again, and I didn't expect him to. Some men carry disappointment like a badge. Others carry it like a burden. Either way, it's theirs to carry, not mine. I still walk the garden in the mornings. The magnolia is growing. Daniel pruned the roses last week. The swing is gone, but the wind still moves like it remembers where it used to be. I sit in Evelyn's chair and watch the light change on the walls, and I think often of that final moment when I handed them those envelopes and said nothing else. That was the gift they never saw coming. No anger, no bitterness, just truth wrapped in silence. If you're still listening to this, maybe you've lived a version of it yourself. Maybe you know what it feels like to be measured by what you leave behind. Maybe you've sat in your own Evelyn's chair, wondering when it's time to speak. If this story has touched something in you, something raw, something real, then stay. There are more stories like this, not just about wills or wealth, but about dignity, about what happens when the quiet one finally speaks. Because in the end, not all revenge is loud. Some of it is handed out like this, softly, decisively, and when it lands, everyone leaves quietly.